Welcome, everybody, to our new episode of Cities Speak. I'm Clarence Anthony, your host and CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. You know, I've had a lot of guests here, a number of guests, and today we have a wonderful guest who is here really to talk about a big issue that a lot of cities are facing, and in fact, NLC has set as a priority, and that is the issue of housing. Affordable housing, housing supply, homelessness, it's all intertwined, and there's so much local leaders can do to work together to create a place where everyone in their community has a safe, healthy, and affordable place that I tend to say they can call it home, not just a community where they show up every day and they go to work and come back. They expect that place to be a place that they can call home. We are joined today by Mayor Corey Woods of Tempe, Arizona, for another episode of Cities Speak. And let me tell you, I am so pleased to have the mayor here. For those of you who don't know the mayor, Mayor Woods is the 33rd mayor of Tempe, Arizona, a position he's been serving in since 2020. Before becoming mayor, he served on the Tempe City Council for 2 terms over 8 years. He's widely regarded as a champion for affordable housing and community development and was recently named Advocate of the Year by the Arizona Housing Coalition for his commitment to making systems-level changes to expand affordable housing and workforce opportunity in Tempe. Tempe is a beautiful place. I was there this summer. The mayor didn't know it, but I came and drove through the community. Hey, Mayor, I'm so excited to have you here today. Welcome to Cities Speak.
Thank you so much. It's great seeing you. I appreciate the opportunity to do the podcast.
It's a special thing for me to be able to have you here. And I want to start off about the story that got you here, that got you interested in public sector. And one of the things that I'll share with the listeners, some years ago, I was an elected official, and I got a chance to welcome the mayor as a city council member at that time to the National League of Cities, and to watch the mayor now lead the city is just a special thing for me to be able to see. But Mayor, what was your journey to getting involved in elected office?
I first got interested in politics probably when I was about 8, 9 years old. This is a very funny story I tell people regularly. My parents were not involved actively in politics, but the dinner conversations at the Woods household were 2-hour affairs pretty much every night, talking about domestic policy and foreign policy, education, and sort of all things in between. My father worked for the city of New York and worked in the nonprofit sector for many years. My mother was a teacher in New York City public schools for over 30 years. And so a lot of the conversations revolved around very pertinent social issues and foreign issues. I remember watching back in 1988 the presidential debate between George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis. And I remember being just glued to the television screen and thinking, this is incredible. Here are these 2 guys of different political parties, but they have all of this knowledge about all of these different issues and just things that I was just shocked that they were up there for the most part, not without notes, but just reciting things from memory, just the deep reservoirs of knowledge on so many different subjects and topics. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to be that kind of person. And so I remember in 5th grade was the first time I had the opportunity to run for student council, I should say. And I won that race. And I just sort of continued on all through junior high school, and college. And so fast forward, I moved down to Tempe in 2003. I'll have been there actually for 20 years this coming June. And I decided I was going to go to graduate school at Arizona State University. I was pursuing a master's in educational policy. And I just, about almost 2 years into that program, and this is a funny story about my mother, who's past 11 years or so ago, but I will tell you, I'm sure she is smiling down hearing about this story right now. I made a decision that I was only about 2 credits away from actually graduating. I just had to finish the dreaded thesis that many times trips up many folks looking to get their master's degree. And I made that decision at that point that I wanted to run for the city council in the 2006 Tempe City Council race. My mother's perspective was, you need to finish school because you can get into politics whenever you want, but you only, your education is something that people can't ever take away from you. But I was just determined that it was something that I wanted to do. And that first race in 2006, I remember I'd only been in Tempe for about 2.5 years at this point. So I didn't really have a lot of contacts. I didn't know a lot of people. I wasn't well connected. And there were 5 people, including myself, running for what were 3 seats that year on the council. I ended up finishing in dead last in 5th place. I mean, for a guy who'd won every student council race that he had ever been involved in, losing in front of 175,000 of your closest friends is a very new and interesting experience. But I remember picking up the next day and I went down to the city clerk's office and I remember sitting with her and saying, let's go through the numbers. I want to see exactly where I did well and where I didn't do so well. And she told me, Corey, you did very well in the northern portions of the city, but you didn't do quite so well in the southern portions of the city. She's like, actually, when the early numbers came in, I thought you were going to win. But from that alone, though, a lot of people reached out to me and said, Corey, it wasn't that people didn't like you, it's that they didn't know you. And so I think if you want to get more involved in the city of Tempe and you truly want to make this your home, I think you can probably have a successful career in public service. And after that race was over, all of a sudden I had all these people who began to reach out asking me to join various nonprofit boards in the city of Tempe. And all of a sudden, people were coming to me saying, well, the Kiwanis Club board would be a great place for someone like you. The Boys and Girls Club board, because you talked a lot about youth issues. All of a sudden, I went from being on no boards to within about 3 or 4 months after losing, being on 5 boards. I wanted to put in the time to work, but I also was just thirsty to understand more about how the city of Tempe worked and the different components and nonprofits that really made it a great place. But after that happened for quite a few months, then people began to approach me and say, Corey, I know you lost that race in 2006, but there's another council race coming around in 2008. And I was fortunate to win that race back in May of 2008. I was only 29 years old at the time. I was probably the second or third youngest council member ever elected in the city of Tempe. I was also the city's first African-American council member in our history, and we've been around since 1874. And that was sort of my path from watching presidential debates back in 1988 to being involved in student council to losing that first race to in 2008 becoming the first African-American council member for the city of Tempe.
Man, that's a great story, and it's so interesting. I remember meeting you at the Congressional City Conference. You and your 2 other colleagues, y'all had just got elected, bright-eyed, excited about it. And again, I kept in touch with you and just admire what you have done over the years. And, as a council member and mayor, there's so many issues that you deal with every day that's coming in front of you. But you are known really as a housing advocate and someone that has really focused on that that issue in a way that a lot of cities have not, and that's in a very comprehensive way. What drew you to that issue, and what drew you to being a leader in that space?
I think one of the main things was my father worked for the Human Resources Administration of New York City under 3 different mayors, under Mayor Ed Koch, Mayor David Dinkins, and for a small period of time, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And so I think that was sort of how I got interested, because he many times was involved in human services, working with people, homeless shelters in New York City, and talking about what it takes to house people or how to staff facilities of that nature. I think that's what probably began to pique my interest. But as an adult, what really got me moving in that direction was being a young person living in Tempe, looking to run for the city council and having a lot of friends in their sort of early to mid 20s who were graduating with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and even doctorates. And they were beginning to tell me we can't afford to live in this city anymore. The price of housing is skyrocketing to such a place where we feel as if we're probably going to have to move in order to find a job and sustain ourselves. And I thought to myself, this is really something. You've got people going to, a major university, getting a degree. You don't want that kind of brain drain happening in your city. You want people after they acquire these incredible degrees, especially from a wonderful university like Arizona State University, you want them to stay within your city and contribute to the economy and create the next new thing. You don't want them taking all of that energy and all of that knowledge and excitement and leaving your community and going somewhere else. And so I think as an adult, that's really what piqued my interest in housing was how do we find a way to ensure that all of these people can really afford to stay in that community, along with myself, frankly. The other thing is when you drive into the city of Tempe, right when you enter the city's borders, there's a sign that basically says, and I'll sort of paraphrase the sign, but it says, "Welcome to Tempe. We are a diverse, inclusive community." And the fact is, I kind of realized even at a young age, you can't be an inclusive, diverse community if you don't truly have housing for people from all different backgrounds and education levels and occupations and incomes. And so to me, it equates to a lot of our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals is you have to make sure that anyone who is working a 40-hour-a-week job, and wants to live in this community, whether they're pursuing their education or whether they're working a full-time job or whether they're a senior citizen who's retired and maybe living on a fixed income, that they have the ability to live in clean, safe housing because everyone deserves to have their dignity. And frankly, I think what makes our community such an incredibly rich place, and when I talk about rich, I mean in terms of diversity of perspectives and interests, is the fact that you've got people of all of these different backgrounds living within our 42 square miles. And so my thought process began, we have to find a way to make sure that there are a diversity of housing options, both rental and home ownership in the affordable, workforce, market rate, and even luxury categories to make sure that we can continue to be the city of Tempe that people have known to love and have grown to love for many, many years.
Yeah, and I think that is very key and very important. And one of the initiatives that you created was Hometown for All. And I think that's interesting because again, I talked about that a place you can call home where you can actually afford a home, have good parks, create job opportunities, and you drive into your home and it's yours. So you'll really say, I live in Tempe. I'm a resident of Tempe. And so that is a home owner for all type concept. But you've been able to get the city council to commit dedicated funding to accelerate affordable workforce housing. Tell us about what you wanted to accomplish with that effort and putting that initiative together.
Well, for me, fortunately, Tempe is a very progressive, forward thinking city. And one person can't do this job on their own. I always tell people it does you no good to be a lone wolf. And there are sometimes mayors who get in these positions and they begin to believe their own press clippings. And it becomes, hey, I can go out there and do whatever I want because, folks elected me mayor and I'm just going to go ahead and run with it. But the reality is, in a place like the city of Tempe, where you have what they call a council manager form of government. It's not a strong mayor system. We have a city manager that runs all the operations. So he more or less acts as the CEO and I kind of act more as the chairman of the board of directors. But I have a council where every member, including myself, we have one vote apiece. And including myself, there are 7 of us. And I am very, very fortunate that every member of my city council shares those same values, including the previous council that passed the Hometown for All initiative back in late January of 2021. And really what it came from was when I became mayor, I just didn't want to be a person who had to go out and give speeches in front of groups or to the press talking about my desire to create more affordable housing and my passion for this issue, but without having any kind of dedicated revenue stream to make it a reality. Now, Arizona also has some unique challenges that make it harder to create affordable housing. So we are one of only 7 states in the entire country where there's a legislative prohibition against inclusionary zoning. And inclusionary zoning, for those watching, is the whole concept of a developer comes to you and they ask to potentially change the zoning or upzone a property. And with inclusionary zoning, if it's in place, you can actually say, yes, the council is willing to grant your upzoning, but we're going to ask that you set aside 20% of these units to be permanently affordable. In Arizona, that practice was banned by a previous legislature, so we don't have any ability to mandate that there's any set aside of affordable units in a new development. It's a very private property rights friendly state. The other thing is 49 out of 50 states in our country have access to another tool called tax increment financing, which has also been very helpful when it comes to creating additional affordable and workforce housing opportunities, and also helping to address and revitalize blighted areas or areas that have historically been ignored by city councils. We are the only state in the entire country where there is a legislative prohibition against having tax increment financing. We also have a legislative preemption against rent control. That's another thing that I hear about from a lot of residents who will email me and say, Corey, my apartment complex is raising my rent 20, 25% in a single calendar year. How can you expect people to be able to afford this? The city council should be able to pass some kind of a law or ordinance that limits these things to rate of inflation or perhaps a 2 or 3% increase. And it always saddens me when I have to tell them we don't have the ability to implement rent control because it's illegal according to Arizona state law. I say all of this not to talk about all the things that we can't do, but just to talk about a lot of the prohibitions and the preemptions that we're up against as the city of Tempe when it comes to creating more housing. And so my perspective was, I didn't, though, want to just sit around talking about all of the challenges that we face and the legislature this, the legislature that. I said, look, the people of this city elected me and 6 other members of this council to identify creative solutions to address the challenges that we're facing in present day. And so that's where the Hometown for All program was born. And it kind of consists of a couple of different funding mechanisms. And really quickly, one funding mechanism is we basically take an amount equivalent to about 50% of certain permitting fees that are paid to the city of Tempe when a project is proposed, like an apartment complex, we take or a Class A office building, and we take an amount equivalent to that 50% of those certain permitting fees, and we put that into what's called the Tempe Coalition for Affordable Housing, which is a nonprofit 501c3 that the city manages. We also, at the same time, have a voluntary contribution structure for developers who'd like to contribute to helping us achieve our affordable housing needs. Once again, voluntary because we're not allowed to mandate. And so that structure says we ask developers for a 20% contribution of the total permitting fees on a certain project if you're building multifamily residential, and 10% if you're building sort of commercial/office. So those are sort of the 2 revenue streams. And here's the reason why we kind of did it that way, especially when it comes to that amount equivalent to the permitting fees, is because usually what happens when you're on a city council, you start having early conversations, and we're on a July, June fiscal year. You have conversations in the fall where you talk about wanting to make a substantial contribution to affordable housing. And a lot of city councils talk about this, and they're all well-meaning, and they want to do the right thing. The challenge then comes, though, when you get into March, April, May of the following year when you've got to pass the budget. And then all of the different departments are coming to you and they all have various needs. And I'm not saying that those needs are insignificant or not valid. They're absolutely valid needs, especially when a lot of cities over the last 2-3 years are being asked to do more with less. So, but the challenge then becomes when that sort of happens, many times the initial contribution you wanted to make to really put a major dent in the crisis we have with affordable housing, it then becomes a much smaller number. not because anyone was being disingenuous or not telling the truth, but just because when people come to you with the other needs, you feel the need to make sure that you get a little here and you get a little here and you get a little here. And then at the end of the day, your affordable housing number begins to just shrink down to here. And it's like, well, we'll give 1/10 of what we thought we were going to give, and we'll get them next year. And so this was sort of my and the council's way of saying, before that money hits the general fund and it just goes to every other expense that will happen or that will be needed in the city of Tempe, let's take that money and actually put it in that 501c3 to ensure that that money can't be touched and to ensure that that money will be used for the purpose of creating more affordable and workforce housing opportunities in our community.
You know what is so interesting? I mean, the way that you started, you really talked about those barriers that existed. And one of the things that we often think about is the politics that is occurring in America. And you've been really successful in engaging across the line, if you will. I mean, this whole concept that a house and the keys to the house ain't red and ain't blue. They just get you in the house when you go and pick up those keys. And so thinking about it in that way, you currently serve on Arizona's Bipartisan Housing Supply Study Committee. And I'd really like to ask you to talk a little bit about, what you think city leaders from throughout America could learn from that bipartisan approach and the outcomes of that committee, because that's what's going to make it happen. Because, the keys aren't red, they aren't blue. It's just folks want affordable, quality housing.
Yeah, I was very pleased to be selected for that committee. I spent approximately 6 months going down to the state legislature and frankly also with the other group of people that were selected touring the state because housing is really a statewide issue. And so we tried to make sure we weren't just meeting at the state capitol, but that we were going to all different portions of northern and southern Arizona to make sure that others could participate in this conversation very actively as well. I was fortunate that when that study committee was created, there was a seat that was carved out for anyone that the League of Arizona Cities and Towns wanted to designate. And I was fortunate to be the person that they selected to go down on behalf of the League to really champion issues pertaining to housing. And so, but it's what we found from that 6 months. I mean, look, were there clearly issues that we disagreed on and sometimes vehemently? Absolutely. There were times where we just weren't going to get to the same place, but I thought that the conversations were they were rational, logical debates where people kept everything at a very high level. There was no punching below the belt, and I appreciated that from all of the people that sat on that study committee. But then I also found there was a lot of agreement on a lot of things in that committee. Lots of conversation. One of the big conversations or points that we all more or less agreed on. Now, we have different ways of approaching this in terms of how we might want to address it. But we talked a lot about zoning and some of the challenges that creates. There are a lot of folks in the home builders industry and the multifamily housing industry that would talk. Their concern with zoning was, we're looking to build more multifamily units. And a lot of the zoning really steers much more towards single family zoning. And so it becomes very challenging when you're going to communities that historically have not had a lot of multifamily housing, and you're trying to address the housing crisis. And people don't want you to, and city councils don't want you to build it. They want to remain a single story, single family only kind of community. So the folks in the business industry portion, they were pushing for a lot of zoning reform. But then a lot of folks who are on the affordable housing advocate side and municipalities like the city of Tempe, we were also pushing for reforms when it comes to zoning as well, because we recognize that's created a lot of challenges when it comes to creating more affordable and workforce housing opportunities. So once again, the solutions that we recommended might have differed a little bit in terms of what they look like and what the implementation should look like. But there was a lot of agreement that, look, we have a sort of antiquated system of zoning, not just in the state of Arizona, but throughout the country. And we need to talk about common sense ways to reform that system so we can actually create more multifamily units, so we can address the housing supply issues by themselves. I mean, the Arizona Department of Housing over the last year talked about the fact that the state of Arizona was 270,000 housing units short of where we should actually be. Maricopa County, where the city of Tempe is located, is the fastest growing county from a population standpoint in the entire country. The city of Phoenix is now the fifth largest city in the country from a population standpoint. So we're no longer a small region. We are an urban metropolitan area, and we need to begin to craft solutions that meet the challenges of the present day. And so, interestingly, what we found on that study committee was that while we differed on some things, and some things pretty vocally, there were some things like talking about, some common sense reforms to the way that we practice zoning with cities and towns, that there was a door that was open there for a lot of bipartisan cooperation. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of that committee, what bills are dropped in this current legislative session, and potentially opportunities even for the next legislative session to begin to address our housing supply issue, but also our affordable housing crisis that we're also facing as well.
Well, I want to be able to give you this opportunity as we come to conclusion to be the housing czar for the United States of America or for the National League of Cities, every city, town, and village, and to ask you about the future of affordable housing, because the challenges that you're facing, Mayor, every city in America, no matter what the size, it may be affordability, it may be quality, it just may even be access. The whole vision that you go to college and you get an education, you should be able to, start at a job, get an apartment, start your life. All of those issues are challenges right now in every city, town, and village, especially for the fast growing areas like the Arizona, the Texas, the Floridas, the Washington, D.C., where the National League of Cities office is. You are in charge now. What's your vision for the future of affordable housing in Tempe and cities, towns, and villages all over America?
Well, one of the major things, and I'm really pleased that the current administration has really focused on a lot of this, especially when it came to the American Rescue Plan and a lot of the recovery dollars that were given, is that providing that money directly to cities and towns is of tremendous benefit. We have some governors that you can provide the money to the state, and the money will make its way down to the municipalities. But then you had some governors where the money would go to the governor, and the money would not end up trickling down to cities and towns, which is where a lot of the action actually is. So one of the things I've really appreciated about the Biden-Harris administration is they really have made a concerted effort to ensure that that money goes directly to us. And because we are sort of the governing body that's closest to the people, and I think we have a really good handle and a really good feel for what our residents' wants are, and even more importantly, what their needs are. So I think that's critically important. And I was going to say, our new governor, Katie Hobbs of the state of Arizona, who's a longtime friend of mine, I know she shares that same vision as well. I mean, she's a person who was a career social worker and has a real heart for affordable housing and human services. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the great things that happen in her administration. So, and I know she's going to be a very big advocate for trying to make sure that cities and towns get additional funding to do exactly what we've been talking about during this podcast. The other thing, just from a kind of a 30,000 foot view, is that talking about how we need to sort of stop with statewide preemptions. We can't, on one hand, talk about local control, but really say, well, that only qualifies when it's something that I like. That's one of the things that I've been constantly sort of talking with the Arizona legislature about during my time as mayor, and frankly, during my time as a city council member prior to this. We would many times have many people in our state legislature talking about how we believe in local control and we believe in small government. But then all of a sudden, whenever a city like Tempe would want to do something that was very much in line with the values of our residents, all of a sudden we would see these preemption bills dropped about a whole number of things, even down to the inability to regulate the use of single-use plastic bags. It's like, well, I don't understand why that's a matter of statewide concern. If that's what our residents want to do because they care about the planet and environmental sustainability, then let the city council that was elected by those people make those governing decisions. And so I think of the same thing when I'm talking about housing. I would try to make sure that states were not and state legislatures were not imposing those kinds of legislative preemptions on cities. I can only imagine how much easier it would be for me as a mayor and for our city council if we did not have situations where there were prohibitions against rent control and inclusionary zoning and tax increment financing. We would be able to create so much more affordable housing much more quickly for people who are really in desperate need of it. So, Clarence, to your point, your earlier point, I wholeheartedly agree. It used to be that people could come right out of school, move out of their parents' home, get an apartment, and save up money for a house and buy a home, and they could really sustain themselves. And we're finding that American dream is a lot more elusive for so many people living in our country right now. And so I think we have to do whatever we can from a local, statewide, and federal perspective and standpoint to really ensure that we are creating more affordable and workforce housing opportunities for people who need them, both in the rental and home ownership categories. And I think we have to just really get away from this legislative preemption deal altogether. I think we have to recognize many times that, for cities and towns, I'm the person who lives right in the heart of downtown Tempe, and our residents and business owners see me walking around the downtown, walking to City Hall in under 5 minutes, going to the grocery store, going to the drugstore, and various spots in our city. I know our residents because I see them all the time, and we have honest, candid conversations each and every day. And so what I would like is for the ability for myself and my 6 colleagues to govern our community based on what our residents truly want and truly need.
Well, for City Speak, you have been introduced to an amazing leader that Tempe is blessed to have. But now I brought you this amazing leader nationally, and that is Mayor Corey Woods of Tempe, Arizona. And what I've learned, and this has just been great from a housing perspective, but even from an individual leadership perspective, Mayor, it takes a vision first. And it takes that vision of what you want to do, a plan about what you want to do with an issue like housing. And then it takes continued passion, collaboration, partnership to be able to achieve that vision as it relates to housing and any other issue. But one of the most important thing is getting it in the hands of local leaders. If you want something done in America, give it to a mayor, give it to a city council, give it to a city manager, and we will create that vision and plan according to what our local community desires in that community. The type of housing, the types of jobs, the types of sustainability, the environment. Put it in the hand of a local leader, and they will get it done. And Mayor Woods is one of those get it done mayors in America. And I have to tell you, the National League of Cities is so honored to have you as a member. Tempe is honored to have you as mayor. And lastly, and it's not last because I want to make sure you know, I consider you a friend and appreciate your time and commitment to public service.
Same here, Clarence. I really, really appreciate the opportunity and consider you to be a dear friend as well. And, I think about, talking to you and your history as a mayor. I think about someone like myself who was fortunate enough to serve as the first African American council member in Tempe history, and now the city of Tempe's first African American mayor. People like myself could not have been here without the contributions of you and the work that you have done in opening doors and breaking through glass ceilings so people like me would have an opportunity to live out my life's dream. When I see my parents and my cousins and they will routinely say, Corey, we are so proud of what you have been able to accomplish in the world of public service, but I couldn't have done it without people like Clarence, Anthony, like yourself, and the trails that you have blazed for people like me to be successful and to serve our residents. So I want to say to you, my friend, thank you very much for everything you've done and for what you continue to do with the National League of Cities. And thank you for everything you've done for me on a personal level as well. I deeply appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And Cities Speak audience, you again have been so blessed. And ironically, being the first mayor, this is going to be shared with our audience in February, which is Black History Month. So you are a great American, a great African American. And I got to tell you, we celebrate African American History Week and month in February. And you are, in fact, have made history throughout America. So thank you. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to City Speak with Clarence Anthony. If you like this show, let us know. Share this episode with your friends and make sure to subscribe. We're curious to hear what you think, what you want more of, and how we can improve. If you have feedback or an idea for a guest you'd like Clarence to sit down with, send us your thoughts at cityspeakpodcast@nlc.org. Join us next month for a new episode. Like and subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.